Hello everyone, my name is Claudius Cazan. In this video, we take a look at yet another very simple harmonic progression. That is the one that goes from the tonic chord to the subdominant and back to the tonic. Also the one that goes from the tonic, subdominant, dominant, and back to the tonic. I will also perform for you the number 36 from Robert Starr's Rhythmic Training book and also Solfege number 36, so please stay tuned. Welcome back. Let's take a look at this harmonic progression that goes from the chord of the 1, or as we call it, the tonic, and the chord of the 4, or the subdominant. Every time we move from one chord to the other, in these exercises that we're doing in here and harmonizing chords and so on, we always look for notes in common. Okay? Do the two chords have any notes in common that we can keep? And why do we need to keep them? Because this is what makes for the smoothest transition between chords, okay? So if we have any notes in common, and we do in this case, let's take a look at the tablet. We're in the key of G right now. I wanted to move away from the key of C because it's very simple. I know there's no sharps or flats, and it's easier to deal with. But let's move keys. Let's move to the key of the G, which has one sharp in the key signature. And on the upper staff here, I put the triads that we will be dealing with. And these triads are all in root position. On a separate piece of paper somewhere, a music paper, sketch in your triads in root position, which will show you immediately what notes you'll be dealing with. And here you can see the GBD as the triad in root position on the chord of the 1 in G major, GBD. Also the one on the 4th scale degree, the 4, CEG, and then back to the 1, okay? Now, and I work this harmonic progression in 4 parts on the second part of the staff in here. You can see how the note G, okay, it's common between the two chords, and I show that with the two ties in there, and that's present in the tenor. All right, so in the tenor, we're keeping the common note. The bass, of course, has to move from the chord of the 1, which is G, up to the chord of the 4, which is on C, right, and back to the 1. And we're scoring all the other elements of the triad properly in here. And I will play this for you so you see how it sounds. Sounds like this. Okay? Makes for a very smooth transition because of that common note that we keep in the tenor. All the other voices are moving, as you can see, by step. Okay? So one of the things that you want to always do is to check to see if at least your inner voices can move by step. The bass will have to properly jump or go from the chord, one chord to the other. So the bass is not going to move, most of the time is not going to move by step. And maybe the soprano either, because if you're harmonizing a pre-existing tune, you'll have to follow the shape of the tune itself. But the inner two voices, the tenor and the altos, those, it's best if you keep them moving stepwise as much as possible. You can see in here how the D and the B in the tenor and in the alto and the soprano are moving up by step to E and C, which are part of the 4 chord, and then back to D and B, again, as part of the 1 chord. Okay? Every time we move from one chord to the other, we have to look at the 5th and the octaves. Okay? And those are shown in here with the red ties. Okay? C to C, if you can look at the big tie in the middle chord, that is from C to C, right? Okay? We look to see how do we approach this particular octave. Okay, the bass comes in from the G, it leaps up into it, so it's an upward motion, but also the soprano goes up to the C as well. This is called, if you remember from last time, a direct motion. When both voices are moving up in the same direction, but by not the same amount, okay? So you can see how the bass comes up a fourth from G to C, but the soprano moves up by step, and it's actually a half step between B and C. So whenever you have a direct motion like this, it's best if one of the voices is moving by step. So stay away from those direct octaves in which both voices are leaping up or down into it. Okay? In this case, it's perfectly fine because the soprano moves by half step. Okay? And we also look at the fifth. You can see between the bass and the tenor. Okay? How do we approach this fifth? This fifth, it's approached by what we call oblique motion because the tenor stays, right? It's tied. I show it with the tie on pitch G, but the bass moves up from G to C. Oblique motion is perfectly okay. It's actually one of the two motions that's completely fine. The other one is the contrary motion. But we don't have any contrary motion in here between the fifth and the octaves. Now let's look at the third chord to see how we move back from the 4 to the 1. The fifth now that appears between the bass and the alto. Okay, it's also a direct motion fifth. The alto moves down by step from the E to the D, and also the bass leaps down from the C to the G. And this is perfectly okay because one of the voices, again, is moving by step. And also the octave formed between the bass and the tenor. Okay, that octave is also what we call oblique motion because one voice stays and the other one moves. Okay, so this is a very smooth, well done harmonic progression between the chord of the 1 to the 4 and back to the 1, taking in consideration the common tone, as you call it, the common note between the two chords, and moving properly with all the other voices. Okay, taking care of the fifth and the octaves, making sure that we do not have any parallel octaves or parallel fifths. This is perfectly okay. By the way, if I move to the next tablet page here, if this particular harmonic progression from the 4 to the 1 happens at a cadential point. What's a cadential point? A cadential point is a point in music where there's a very obvious stop of some sort. And we have two kind of cadences. We have final cadences when the actual music stops or the movement stops completely, and that's the end of the piece. Or you have inner cadences, or internal cadences, as we call them, where temporarily the movement stops, but then the piece continues. That's called usually a cadential point. Now, if this happens between the chord of the 4 and the 1, we call this a plagal cadence. So, if I play these two chords again, the one on the 4, and resolving it back to the 1, okay, this is called a plagal cadence. So remember, the 4 to the 1 cadence, it's called plagal cadence. It's also called popularly the Amen cadence, okay, because it's present in so many hymns, in hymn books and so on that are related to church music, right? So if you hear this other term, the Amen cadence, that's the 4 to the 1, and also called the plagal cadence. Very good. Let's look at another harmonic progression, a very simple one. It's a little more extended now. We go from the chord of the 1, chord of the 4, to the 5, and then back to the 1. Okay? Again, we look for common tones, and you notice immediately that between the chord of the 4 and the chord of the 5, we do not have any common notes. Okay, I changed keys again. We're in the key of F right now, 1 flat in the key signature, just to get some experience and exposure with some other keys other than C. Okay, and again, I sketch my triads in the upper part of the first staff here. Okay, and I put them all in root position. Okay, F A C, chord of the tonic 1. Okay, B flat, D, F. Remember, I have a B flat in the key signature, so we have to account for that. B flat, D, F, that's the chord of the 4. okay? C, E, G, that's the chord of the 5 and the key of F, and back to the chord of the 1, F, A, C. Notice that these are all triads. We don't employ yet any 7th chords, so we only deal with 3 pitches in each of the chords. All right, so I'm starting with this, F, A, F, C. Okay, this is the chord of the 1. Notice that I double the root. The root is doubled between the bass and the alto. And I'm moving to the chord of the 4 by taking care, making sure that I keep all my common notes, and that is my F in the alto again. So I'm moving from this to this. Okay, again, I'm doubling the root of the 4 chord, the B flat, between the bass and the tenor. Okay, and all the other voices are moving stepwise. Okay, they're moving stepwise. The tenor moves up to the B flat. The soprano moves up from C to the D. Bass needs to do what the bass does. In this case, moves down to the 4. Okay, down a 5th to the chord of the 4, actually, from F to B flat. Okay, this is something that we've already done in the prior example. But now we're moving from the chord of the 4 to the chord of the 5. And you'll notice that between these 2 chords, we do not have any notes in common. Okay, but however, the rules remain. Okay, you have to move stepwise as much as you can for the sake of smoothness, and you want to make sure that your 5th and octaves are taken care of, the approach into those 2 intervals, you don't have any parallels, okay? And you want to stick most of the time with the contrary motion. You won't have any oblique motion this time because there's no common note to sustain and stay, all right? But you want to make sure that at least your 5th and your octaves are approached by contrary motion. Let's look at the 5th. On the 3rd chord, the chord of the 5, we have a 5th that's being formed between the bass and the tenor, C to G. How is that approached? It's approached by contrary motion, okay? The B flat in the tenor leaps down to the G, okay? And the bass comes up from the chord of the 4 to the chord of the 5, okay? So that 5th, it's approached by contrary motion, which is perfectly okay. All right, let's look at the octave that's being formed between the bass and the soprano, right? And you can see immediately that octave is approached by contrary motion perfectly. Both notes are coming in, okay, by contrary motion, by going up and down by step, okay? So that is great. You won't always be able to move stepwise with some of the voices, but you know, leaps of a 3rd, a 4th, even a 5th, it's good. Anything bigger than that, like a 6th, a 7th, it's kind of difficult, but we don't have any of those in this case, so that's fine. And then we move from the chord of the 5 to the chord of the 1. Again, we have a common note that we can keep in the soprano. We look at the octaves in the 5th that's being created between the alto and the soprano. Okay, this time is by contrary motion, oblique motion, oblique motion, because the C stays. Okay, so that's great. The octave that's being formed now between the bass and the alto, the F to F, look at that one. Okay, the bass leaps up from the chord of the 5 to the chord of the 1, from C to F, and but the alto is moving by step in the same direction. Okay, so we have a direct motion in here, but it's okay because at least one of the voices is moving by step, and it's even better because it's moving by half step. All right, between the E and the F and the alto. Okay, so you know, feel free to stop the video and see exactly how I've done this. Again, this is definitely not the only possibility. This is one of the good ways to resolve this harmonic progression, 1-4-5-1, but it's definitely not the only one. So feel free to exercise. Begin your 1 chord in a different arrangement, different position, and knowing what you already know about voice leading, voice movement, keeping notes in common, voice ranges and all that stuff, see if you can come up with a viable resolution that doesn't break any of the rules. Okay, that's the deal here. All right, let's move on and do one other thing in here. We already looked at this, you know, all the parallel, all the octaves in the fifth, and how we approach them. This is exactly what this shows in here. So always when you move from one chord to the other, look at the octaves and the fifth, and look carefully to see how you approach them. Oblique motion, contrary motion, perfectly fine. Direct motion, it's okay if one voice moves by step, but parallel motion, it's completely out of the table. We don't allow that. And I'm going to show you in a later example what I mean by parallel motion. Okay? Very good. This, by the way, the cadence that's formed between the chord of the 5 to the chord of the 1, it's called an authentic cadence. So you have the plagal, 4 to 1, but the one from 5 to 1, which is even more popular than the 4 to 1, it's called an authentic cadence. Again, this particular chord progression that goes from 5 to the 1 can appear in the final cadence most of the time, or even in the internal cadence, okay? And it sounds like this. Okay, so going from the 5 to the 1. Okay, remember we're in the key of F. Okay, 1 flat in the key signature. So our 1 chord is F. The C chord is our 5 chord. And by the way, this is called an authentic cadence. So remember, you know of 2 cadences right now. 4 to 1, plagal, 5 to 1, authentic. All right? And I'm showing here again all the octaves and fifth with the red ties. Make sure that you know how you approach them properly and so on. Okay, how about if instead of the chord of the 5, we want to spice things up a little bit and bring in the chord of the 5/7. Remember the chord of 5/7, it's also called the dominant 7th chord, okay? You can see when I'm preparing this in the top left corner here, I have triads on the chord of the 1. I have a triad on the chord of the 4, but I have a 7th chord on the 5 chord, C, E, G, B flat, okay? And then, of course, a triad on the chord of the 1 again, okay? So let's see what happens when we substitute the chord of the 5 with the chord of the 5/7. If you go to the resolution that I have in here, you can see immediately, oh, I see what you're doing. Now you have a common note between the chord of the 4 and the chord of the 5/7, okay? Which should make things smoother and also sounding better. Why? Because we have 4 different notes on the chord of the 5. So that chord should sound a little fuller, okay? And you can see, let me see if I can play this particular harmonic progression for you guys. Okay, so this is the chord of the 1, the 4, the 5/7, back to the 1. Ah, sounds pretty nice, right? That's because now you have a common note, that B flat in the tenor, you have it common between the chord of the 4 and the 5/7. Now, 5/7 means that you have a 7th chord, meaning 4 different notes, C, E, G, B flat, okay? And let's look a little bit at this, okay? And I'm looking right now, the chord of 1 to the 4 we already did, so we don't have to analyze it. But let's look a little bit at about the, at the chord of the 5/7, okay? And we have C to C between the bass and the tenor and the bass and soprano, I'm sorry, okay, the red tie. And we need to make sure that we approach that octave properly. And it is approached properly because it's approached by contrary motion, okay? Bass comes down, up from the B flat, and the soprano comes down from the D into that C. We don't have a 5th in here, though, okay? Notice something in here. Notice that the chord of the 5/7 is missing an element. It's missing the G, okay? And I specifically did that because I wanted to have the smoothest possible transition between the chord of the 4 and the chord of the 5. And me getting rid of that G, which is possible from time to time. You could eliminate the fifth as long as you have the root, the third, and the seventh. Those are really important elements. We can't do without those. You can leave out the fifth of the chord. All right? So because we don't have a fifth, we only have one perfect interval in here, the octave, that we need to check to make sure that we approach it properly. All right? And let's move now from the chord of the 5/7 to the chord of the 1. And you will see in this case that we do have all the elements in here. So we have to check for fifth and octaves. The fifth from F to C, all right? It's basically oblique motion because the C carries over from the chord of the 5/7. And the octave, F to F, it's direct motion, but it's okay because the alto moves only by half step. All right, again, feel free to stop the video, look exactly what I did in here. And you can see why this sounds so good. We have a common note now, the B flat, between the chord of the 4 and the 5/7. Okay? You should be really proficient with this, and you should be able to come up with different resolutions of this based on the first, on the position of the first chord. Okay? I'm starting with this. Okay, open position in here, but there's a lot of different ways to resolve this perfectly. Also remember, it's okay if on the chord of the 5/7 you eliminate the fifth, just to make sure that you have all the elements moving properly. Okay? Proper resolution of the 5/7 chord. Let's look a little bit in more detail of this. But before we do this, I want to draw your attention to one schematic that I created for you guys in here. And this is the active notes in a major key. I want you to kind of memorize this because it's so important. What I did in here, I went back to C major because it's easier, okay? And I highlighted in here with blue squares the most stable of the notes in C major. What are those? The most stable notes are the three notes in the tonic triad, C, E, and G, okay? If you have this chord in C major, it doesn't need to go anywhere, okay? This is the chord of the tonic, very stable triad. All the other notes will have to eventually move somewhere to one of these stable notes. And the ones that are most active here are the ones on the 4th degree and the 7th degree. Those are the ones that are circled in red. Now let's see how far are they from a stable note. You'll notice that both of them are 1/2 step away from a very stable note. F needs to move down to the E by 1/2 step. Also B needs to move up by 1/2 step to one of the stable notes, which is C. Okay? So basically you have this, if we can play them together, moving outward to 2 stable notes in the key of C, okay? So if you find yourself dealing with a 5/7 chord, okay, which has these 2 notes in it, for example, the chord of G, B, D, F in the key of C, that's your 5/7, G, B, D, F, right? They have F and B built in there. And those 2 notes will have to properly be resolved, okay? The B needs to go up to C, and the F needs to come down to E, okay? All right, let me do this an octave lower. Okay, so if I have this chord, okay, I have to resolve them in. Those 2 notes have to be resolved in, okay? Or if they're like this, you have to resolve them out, okay? In either case, the F needs to go down to E, or the 4th degree down to the 3rd, and the 7th degree needs to go up to the 1 or to the 8th, which is the same note, okay? Now, how about the other 2 notes? We need to account for the D and the A. The D, you can see that the D is kind of stuck in the middle or there between 2 stable notes. Exactly a whole step apart, either from the C or from the E. So it all depends on, what you want to do with that D. If that D is the only D that you can resolve, you can take it safely up to E. Remember, E is the third of the chord, and you don't want to double the third in any chords, okay? So it's okay if that D is the only D that you have, it's okay to take it to the E. If not, you'd better take it down to the C. And it really doesn't matter how many C's we have. You can even triple the root in some chords if you really need to. But most of the time, we double the root of the chord, especially in the chord of the tonic. Okay, so it's okay. Most of the time, you'll want to take it down to the C. But again, if that D in the chord that employs that D, if that D is the only D in there, you can take it safely to the E, to the third of the tonic chord, C, E, G. Okay? The sixth degree, A, obviously will need to go down to the G. That's the closest to a stable note. You would never want to take it to the B. Why? Because B itself, it's an active note. It's not a stable note. So you cannot really resolve it to the B. The B itself needs to move to C. So the closest stable note that you can take the A, it's down to the G. So the sixth degree will move down to the G. Okay, so have this in your mind when we move over now and we talk about the proper resolution of the 5/7 chord. Okay, so here you go. We're back into the key of F, right, with one flat in the key signature. C, E, G, B flat is our 5/7 chord. 5 because it's built on the fifth degree. F, G, A, B flat, C, right? C is the fifth degree, so C, E, G, B flat. Okay, B flat because of the key signature. And that gives us the dominant seventh chord in the key of F. Okay, and that's the chord that I'm scoring here as the first chord when we actually do the exercise from the second half of the thing. And this is what I have. I have C, B flat, E, G. All the elements are present. Okay, all the elements of the 5/7 chord. We have the root, we have the seventh in the tenor, we have the E, which is the third in the alto, and the G, which is the fifth, we have it in the soprano. How do we resolve this properly? Well, remember one thing. The E, okay, which is the leading tone, the seventh degree in the key of F, needs to move up to the tonic of the one chord, which is F, right? By half step. Always the leading tone moves up to the tonic, okay? The seventh of the 5/7 chord, which is the B flat, or the fourth degree in the scale, needs to move down to the third of the one chord, okay? So the two of them move in contrary motion away from each other. So E flat and, E natural and B flat moving out. Okay, in context, it sounds like this. Okay, notice something interesting that happens in here. Of course, the bass needs to move from the 5 to the 1, okay? And we're moving the seventh of the 5/7 chord down to the third of the one chord. That gives us the third in the one chord. But both of the other notes, of course, the E needs to go to the F, that's fine. But the G also goes to the F as well. And right now we end up with the triple root, okay, in the chord of the 1. So read carefully what I said in there. The third of the 5 chord, which is E, or the seventh degree of the scale, okay, seventh degree in the key of F, are moving up by half step to the root of the chord, okay, or the first scale degree of the one chord. Also underneath, the seventh of the 5 chord, or the fourth degree of the scale, okay, moves down to the third of the one chord, or the third scale degree, okay? So each note that we deal with has two functions. One function, it's in the chord itself. It's either the root, the third, the fifth, or the seventh, okay? Or it has a function in the key itself, okay? So Don't confuse the two of them. That's why I want you to read everything that I said in there very carefully and understand it, okay? The third of the 5 chord, 5 meaning the function, built on the 5th degree, it's also the 7th degree in the scale. So that note has 2 functions, one in the chord itself and one in the bigger scheme of things, which is the scale itself, okay? And how you resolve the 2 of them. Now, to properly resolve the 5-7 chord, you would end up with a triple of the root, okay? You take care of the 2 elements that are very, very important, the 7th and the 3rd in the 5 chord. They have to move by contrary motion out, okay? And you'll end up basically with a triple of the root. Is that a problem? Not really, okay? The only thing that doesn't sound too good is the fact that that chord sounds kind of empty because it's missing the 5th. But you have the most important elements in there, which is the root and the 3rd, okay? 5th, it's missing, but that's okay. Now, this is how to not resolve the 5-7 chord. I told you I was going to give you a no-no in here. So I'm starting from the same chord that we did before, and now I'm moving here. Now, let's see what's the problem in here. The problem in here is really the parallel 5th. Take a look at that little red tie. Both notes between the bass and the soprano are moving up, okay, into the 5th, F to C, by exactly the same amount. So this is not a direct motion. This is a parallel motion. Okay, and this is really not very good, okay? Do not do this. That's why the red X in there, all right? So no parallel 5ths, okay? If you look at the octave F to F, that's a direct motion, but that one's okay because the alto's moving up by only a half step. But look at those 5ths. You're starting with a 5th between C and G, between the bass and the soprano, and you end up with another 5th between the same voices. That means that you've just had parallels, okay? Those are parallel 5th, and they're not good, so do not do that, okay? All right, I want to show you another proper resolution of the 5-7 chord, but this one kind of breaks the rules a little bit, okay? So basically, I'm starting with this. It's a different position this time. It's a closed position, right? Because the upper 3 voices are in closed position. There's no other notes belonging to the chord that I can fit between the upper 3 voices. That's called a closed position. Okay? And I'm resolving that. Resolving that here. Okay. Why is that a proper resolution? It's a proper resolution because E goes to F, B flat goes to A by contrary motion. You can see the red arrows, and that's okay. And I am ending up again with 3 roots: bass, tenor, and alto. They all have the root, which is F, okay? And it's tripled. Again, that kind of sounds a little empty because the 5th is missing. However, if you find this harmonic progression at a cadence, and especially at a final cadence. Even Bach does this. He says this, you know what? I know the proper resolution should be for that E to go to the F. But he breaks the rule and he says, okay, I'm going to forget about that. Instead of going up to the root where I should be going, I am going to leap down so I could have at least a 5th in here. Now, why does he do that? And this is particularly bad. This is how it sounds. So I'm going from the 5-7 to the second one in there, okay, where I have to leap down, and it sounds like this. Okay, now in that chord I have all the elements. I even have my 5th. So only at a cadence, and mainly at a final cadence, that you're allowed to break that rule and say, okay, I know I should take my leading tone to the tonic, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leap into the fifth so that I can have a fuller chord at the end. Okay? So that's the only time when you're allowed to do this. At a final cadence, okay, so that you have all the elements and a fuller sound, you're allowed to skip that rule that says you should take your leading tone up to the tonic, and instead I'm taking that down so I could have a fifth in the one chord. All right? So this is one other exception that I want you guys to remember. Later on, when we look at the and we do harmonic analysis of some Bach chorales, you will see exactly when this happens. And now you're prepared to receive that as being okay. And if Bach does it, I guess we're all okay with it. Okay? In my next video, since you already know quite a little bit about voice leading and moving from one chord to the other with the proper motion between voices, which we call voice leading, I'm going to bring in a chorale, a simple one, pre-Bach. Okay, Bach chorales are quite complex because he was a great composer and he liked to make things complex because they sounded better, not for the sake of complexity. But this first chorale we're going to take a look at comes pre-Bach, another Baroque composer who was known mostly for composing church hymns. Okay, and for that he wrote for four parts, of course, the church choir, and we're going to take a look at those and see how he's composing this. In order for you guys to learn how to compose, you really need to look at how other composers are doing things. Okay, you agree with me? I think that's the best way to learn, and to look to see how others have done it, and then try to imitate it yourself. All right, so in my next video, we're going to start doing some harmonic analysis of some pre-Bach chorales, earlier music that it's not so complex. All right, so that wraps up pretty much what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. So just to summarize really quickly, we looked at the chord of the 1 to the 4 and back to the 1, tonic, subdominant, tonic, okay? And we, again, made sure that we approach the fifth and the octaves properly, we keep common tones, and so on, and we move stepwise between the other voices. That's really, in a nutshell, what you need to take care of. We also looked at the harmonic progression that goes from 1, 4, 5, 1, okay, the extended one, and we saw that there's no common note between the chord of the 4 or the 5, and then we needed to move stepwise as much as possible. If not, a leap of a third, a fourth, or something is okay. Okay, but then we brought in the 5/7 into the mix. So instead of the chord of the 5 as just the triad, we brought in the 5/7 as a seventh chord. And we can see how all of a sudden we have a common tone now between the chord of the 4 and the chord of the 5, which makes things sounding even better and smoother. Okay, but when you resolve the chord of the 5/7 to the 1, you would end up with a tripling of the root if you keep all the rules alive. The only time when you're allowed to break one of those rules is at the final cadence, when you can forego resolving the leading tone to the tonic and instead jumping into the fifth, okay, of the one chord for the sake of a better sound. All right, a fuller sound at the end when you have all the elements in the one chord. So, just a little bit of an insight here of how Bach does things a lot of the time at final cadences. All right, and we also talked about the very important. We talked about those active notes in a major scale. We talked about the most stable notes, the 1, 3, and 5, all right, and how all the other notes have tendencies of moving or resolving to these notes. Very important. The 7 moving up to the 1 or the 8, the 4 moving down to the 3, the 2 moving either up to the 3 or down to the 1, but mostly down to the 1. Okay, and the 6 always moving down to the 5, because you can't really take the 6 to the 7, because the 7 itself is a active or hot note, I like to call it, that needs to move itself up to the 1. So that's another thing we talked about today, which is kind of important. Have that little schematic in your head. Very good. Excellent. So we're done for the day with the theoretic part. Let's move on now to the practical part, which is the solfege, number 36, and then the rhythmic training by Robert Starr also happens to be number 36 as well. Okay, good. So let's look at the solfege. Those of you who have requested the homework was solfege number 36. I will perform it for you. And let's look at the more challenging of elements in here. It's written in 9/8. Okay, 9 eighth notes in each bar. It's written in D major, which means it has 2 sharps in the key signature. And how do I know it's D major? Well, first of all, the key signature, that gives it away, and also the final note. The final note is D. That means that it cannot be B minor, which is the relative minor of D major, could have been B minor. But I'm looking in here and say, it doesn't really subscribe to B minor because it ends with a D, and it has all kinds of accidentals and things like that, so it could be moving through other keys. But the fact that it's ending with a D spells D major quite strongly here. Also, it starts with an A. Now that you know about chords, and A is part of the tonic chord, D, F sharp, A. That's the tonic chord in the key of D, all right? And A is part of it, which also makes a strong case for D major instead of B minor. Okay, and again, you have all kinds of rhythmic patterns and things, some tied notes. You have that triplet that puts 3 quarter notes in the place of 2 dotted quarter notes. So basically, it's 3 against 2. All right. So this is an extended toplet here in the measure. It's not a beat toplet, but it spans across 2 beats. So you have 3 notes in the place of 2. Okay, it's still called a triplet in a way. All right, and you can see that at the end of the second line in here, and I think there's another one. Yes, in the beginning of the 1, 2, 3, 4, beginning of the 5th line. All right, very good. So let me bring my metronome. I didn't bring my metronome, so here's my metronome. Now, I'm giving you a break on this one, and I'm noting here that you could take that dotted quarter note, which is your beat in 9/8. You have 3 of them in 9/8, anywhere between 65 to 70. So let me bring my metronome in here and see how 70 is, but you can definitely bring it down as low as 65 to see. Okay, and so this would be 70, and this would be 65, okay, which would make it even more comfortable. All right, so let's see if I could rest my metronome here. This is at 65, by the way. I like it more comfortable today for some reason. I don't like to rush through things again. So here we go. Oh, let me get my first pitch. La. Okay, triad, chord of the 1, the tonic chord. La. This is the pitch you start with. Here we go. La, fa, mi, re, do, si, re, la, sol, mi, fa, mi, re, la, sol, la, fa, la, sol, mi, la, sol, re, la, sol, la, do, re, si, sol, la, do, re, mi. Fa, mi, fa, la, fa, do, re, si, la, sol, la, si, re, do, si, fa, si, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, fa, la, si, do, re, si, la, fa, la, sol, la, si, do, re, mi, la, si, sol, fa, mi, si, la, fa, re, do, si, re, do, fa, mi, la, fa, si, la, do, si, la, sol, fa, mi, la, fa, re. All right, that will have to do. Notice one thing in here, and I put a fermata at the end of the piece on the last note. That means that you should hold that note longer than normal. How much longer? That's up to each individual. It only means that it should be held longer because it's the last note. So it's really up to the performer as to how long you want to hold that. Also, you'll notice prior to that, there's the RIT, which stands for retardando, which means gradually slowing down. Slowing down because it's approaching the end. And because you're slowing down, imagine that the last note, you know, at a much slower tempo as you've come to decelerate there, that note is going to be naturally a lot longer too. So it's longer for two reasons. Once, because you're decelerating, part of the retard, or retardando as we call it, and also the fermata at the end. So, you know, you can hold that as long as you feel that it should be held. Not ridiculously long, but, you know, longer than normal as part of that natural slowing down at the end of the piece. Hopefully you guys saw exactly how I performed that 2-beat triplet. Okay, so da 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 1, 2, 3, while there was actually 2 clicks of the metronome. You need to practice that. Okay, you need to practice to make sure that you subscribe 3 notes in the place of 2. Okay, so that's good. Great. For next time, 2 more solfeges. This time, the solfege will also move into 16th notes, just like the star number 37 for the first time will employ 16th notes. And I will talk a little bit about that, you know, after I'm done performing for you number 36. Okay, so let's move now to number 36. Number 36 again is employs changing meters. So basically you're going from 9/8 to 6/8 to 12/8, and I think there's a 15/8 too in the third line. Just to remind you, the 15/8 is basically conducted on the formula of 2 and 3. Okay, each of those beats, of course, are subdivided into 3 smaller beats, and they all add up to 15. That's why the 15 in there. But we group them together as a unit, 3 at a time. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So put all these together. Okay, 6 plus 9 give you exactly 15. All right, so let's move on to that. And here we go. Star number 36. I think I could afford to put the metronome up to, let's try 80. Okay, this is not that difficult. Da, 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Da, 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 da. Da, da, da. Da, 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 da. Da, da, da. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Great, that will have to do. So that was number 36. Let's talk a little bit about number 37 and what you're going to be faced with for next time when it comes to 16th notes. 16th notes are a division of the beat. 4 exact divisions of the beat will give you 16th notes, if your beat is the quarter note, of course. Okay, so you'll have to practice. Put the metronome on, let's say, 70. I'm going to bring it down to 70. Okay, and as you listen to the metronome, to the click, try to practice 4 exact 16th notes in the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And make sure that not one note is longer than the other. Okay, this is very important. So, okay, this is how you'll have to subdivide when you see 4 notes. And they're notated with a double beam, okay? Now, look at the first page here, in Chapter 4, it's called, and how Mr. Starr here wants you to get familiar with all these patterns. He calls them patterns, okay? The first one, the first pattern, basically, which is the one at the very, end of the page in here, has 4 16th notes in the beat. Okay, on the second line, you have a pattern in which the first 2 have been combined into an 8th note, and then 2 16th notes. And it sounds like this. Da 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 da. Of course, I'm repeating it so you can hear the pattern. Okay, so the pattern is long, short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long. Okay, da 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 da. Now, in the back of your mind, you're going da 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 da. Okay, and you're combining the first 2 and then 2 separate ones, and that gives you that that second pattern. Da, 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 da. Okay, now the third pattern is reversed. So you have 2 short ones and then a long one. Da, 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 da. Okay, so that's easy. You just reverse the second one into the third one. Now, the fourth one groups 3 of them into one and leaves one at the end. And it sounds like this. Da, 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 da. Da 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 da. In the back of your mind, you go da 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 da. Okay, so really practice that first pattern. That's has to be really solid for you to be able to perform well the other ones. The fifth one there is the one in which the middle 2 have been combined into one, and on the either side you have single ones. So it'll sound like this. Da 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 da. Pretty much like a syncopation. A few videos back I talked about syncopation. Now this is a perfect example like that. All right, when you take one note from an accented part of the beat and you combine it with the other one and you move the accent away from the one that should be accented. That's called a syncopation, and that's exactly what this pattern does. It combines the 2 middle ones together, so the accent moves towards that second one rather than being naturally on the third one. Da 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 da. Okay, and the last one in here basically reverses the number 4. Okay, so instead of having da 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 da, you have da 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 da. Okay, so be very, very familiar with these patterns until you start looking at number 37. Now, for next time, I want you guys to concentrate on both 37 and 38. Okay, they're not that difficult. Okay, they're both in 2/4. So conducting is not too much of an issue right now, but understanding those patterns, it's what these 2 exercises are really concentrating on. Okay, so number 37 and 38 from Robert Starr's Rhythmic Training book for next time. And this brings my video to a close, finally. Hey, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video, when we take a look at an actual chorale by a pre-Bach composer, a composer known for writing church music. Okay, and I will perform for you Solfege number 38 and number 38 from the Robert Starr Rhythmic Training books as well. Until then, I want you guys to stay healthy and safe and be good.